I'm Evelyn Carter, 32 years old. In my family, I've always been the shadow no one wanted to see. My brother's medals shine under every chandelier. My scar, hidden beneath fabric, was treated like a curse I should apologize for. At the Carter table, Nathan's voice always filled the room. Father toasted him like a king, mother dabbed tears of pride. And me? I sat there, silent, watching their smiles pass through me as if I were furniture instead of blood. The night that changed everything came when Nathan leaned in, smirk sharp as a blade, and murmured just loud enough for me to hear, "She'll never be one of us." The table erupted in laughter. No one defended me, not even Daniel. That was the moment I realized silence could wound as much as words. Ever been erased inside your own family? Ever tasted the weight of being unwanted? For me, it began with that dinner, the one where medals glittered, and my silence cut deeper than their applause. Nathan leaned back in his chair, medals catching the light, voice rich with satisfaction as he described his latest promotion. "Colonel at 35? Not bad, right?" He raised his glass, waiting for the applause he knew would come. Father obliged first. Richard's smile carried that unshakable pride reserved only for the son who reflected his own ambitions. "Remarkable, Nathan. Exactly what I expected from you. You've never let this family down." His gaze skimmed past me, as though I were another servant standing in the wings. I felt the sting more than the wine burning my throat. Daniel shifted beside me, his hand brushing mine beneath the table, in a silent attempt at comfort. I didn't move. Margaret's eyes flickered between us, but she said nothing, lips pressed thin, as if acknowledging my presence would disturb the illusion of the perfect Carter legacy Nathan embodied. Nathan wasn't finished. He leaned forward, grin sharpening as his gaze locked on to me. "Some scars are medals," he said, voice smooth. "Others are just excuses." The table erupted in laughter. Father chuckled, mother exhaled like she'd been waiting for the line. Even Daniel, caught between loyalty and appearances, forced a thin smile that twisted like a knife. Heat crawled up my neck, every instinct begging me to answer back, to remind them that I had once bled for the same flag. But my voice lodged in my chest, smothered by the weight of their contempt. I sat still, knuckles white, tasting copper where I bit the inside of my cheek. The laughter rolled on, fading only when the butler stepped in with another bottle of wine. Nathan's smirk lingered. He leaned toward Father, low enough for me to hear, though the others pretended not to. "She'll never be one of us. Every scar tells a story. Mine was one they rewrote as failure." The glass towers of Washington reflected the late autumn dusk as I pushed through the revolving doors of FBI headquarters. Here, the polished marble floor didn't mock me for limping once. The walls didn't whisper about who had been promoted and who had been discarded. Inside this building, my scar wasn't a punchline, it was a weapon sharpened by memory. Leaving West Point had carved a hollow into me, a reminder of dreams cut short. I remembered the sterile hospital light, the physician's clinical tone as he told me that my body would never again pass military review. My father's silence had been louder than any reprimand. They'd written me off, dismissed me like a broken tool. But here, in the bureau, I had rewritten the script. The conference room hummed with the low murmur of voices as agents settled in, stacks of files and screens glowing with data. Director Thomas Whitaker entered with his usual deliberate steps, gray hair cut close, eyes sharper than the steel badge at his chest. He gave a nod that silenced the room, then gestured toward me. "Carter, you're up." I stood, the weight of every eye pressing against me, but the unease was gone. Here, I was not the failed officer, not the forgotten daughter. I was Special Agent Evelyn Carter. With a remote click, the projector illuminated the wall with images, contracts, and logos that carried a sting of familiarity. "Operation Silent Honor," I began, voice steady. "Our target is a ring of military procurement fraud that siphoned millions through shell corporations. Tracing the trail has led us to familiar names Carter Defense Systems and its subsidiaries." A shift ran through the room. I didn't miss the glance one agent shot to another, the unspoken weight of family tangled with corruption. I let the silence breathe for a moment, my jaw tight. Evidence links multiple defense contracts to irregular invoices, falsified quality certifications, and direct kickbacks. These operations have jeopardized not just taxpayer money, but soldier safety in the field. The screen flashed with one more image, Nathan smiling at a ribbon-cutting ceremony, hand clasped with generals, medals bright on his chest. My breath caught, but I didn't falter. Director Whitaker leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. His eyes studied me like he was weighing not just my case, but my resolve. "This is your blood," he said, voice cutting through the silence. "Your father, your brother, their companies. Are you prepared to carry this through? To stand in front of them and accuse them?" I thought of the dining room back in Virginia, of Nathan's smirk, of father's dismissal, of mother's silence. The scar beneath my sleeve prickled as if it still bled. They had marked me as weak, unworthy of the Carter name. Here was my chance to prove them wrong, not by shouting across a dinner table, but by wielding the authority they could never strip from me. I met Whitaker's gaze, letting the words come without hesitation. Justice doesn't care about bloodlines. My voice carried in the stillness, not loud but final. Something flickered in his expression, perhaps approval, perhaps warning. He tapped the file before him. "Then prepare yourself. This won't stay in the shadows." Glasses clinked, laughter roared, every cheer for Nathan hammered my silence deeper. The Officers' Club in Washington glowed with warm chandeliers and polished brass, the kind of place where lineage mattered as much as medals. The November air outside had bitten cold, but in here the heat of cigars and pride thickened the room. I moved through the crowd quietly, Daniel at my side, my dress chosen with precision, neutral, elegant, nothing that could be read as vying for attention. My role tonight was to watch, to listen, to be the shadow they had always assumed I was. At the head of the table, Richard raised his glass, his voice booming across the room. "Carter men always lead." The officers erupted in applause, Nathan bowing his head with mock humility, the medals on his chest catching the light. The toast carried the same sting, it always had an exclusion hidden in plain sight. I could almost hear father's unspoken addendum, "Daughters need not apply." Nathan leaned forward, launching into another round of stories. His voice rose above the chatter, smooth and confident. "Our latest supply contracts have secured millions in revenue. We've structured deliveries so efficiently that not a single order has slipped." His smile broadened, eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of power. The words caught me. Structured deliveries. To the untrained ear, it was nothing more than corporate jargon, but to someone trained to listen for anomalies, it was a crack in the wall. Procurement fraud often hid behind such phrases. Technical language that disguised siphoning funds, inflating invoices, rerouting supplies to shell companies. My pulse quickened. I set my wine glass down slowly, keeping my face still, and slipped my phone into my palm beneath the tablecloth. One quick slide of my thumb, and the recording app began capturing Nathan's every syllable. My heartbeat matched the red dot blinking on the screen. Steady, deliberate, he went on, oblivious. "These contracts are a victory not just for our companies, but for the entire Carter legacy." He lifted his glass higher, his gaze sweeping the room before fixing on me. The pause was intentional, his smile sharpening like a blade. "To rank that matters, not scraps." The officers erupted in another cheer, raising their glasses with him. Richard laughed, pounding the table in agreement. I felt the sting rise again, sharp and familiar, but I didn't flinch. This time I let his words burn into me. Let them etch themselves as evidence. Because this wasn't just arrogance, it was arrogance tied to fraud. And arrogance had a way of loosening tongues. I took a sip of wine, the taste metallic on my tongue, and lowered my phone quietly back into my purse. Nathan basked in his applause, soaking in the admiration of men who only saw medals and contracts, not the shadows behind them. Beneath the noise, I whispered to myself, a vow as much as an observation. He just gave me my first breadcrumb. They thought I lost my place. They never knew I changed the battlefield. The cold December air stung against my skin as I stepped onto the grounds of the FBI training facility. Frost clung to the chain-link fences, and each exhale curled like smoke in the sharp winter morning. The place hummed with the energy of recruits' boots striking pavement, shouts from instructors echoing off concrete walls. Watching them, I remembered another set of grounds, another march of boots, another cadence I once followed, West Point. The memory pressed against me like a bruise that never healed. The discharge papers had been crisp, clinical, final. They had told me my service was over. But here I carried something heavier than rank, a badge. And that badge carried the weight of law, not legacy. Inside the facility, I found Captain Miller leaning against the wall of the gym, his posture casual but his eyes sharp as ever. His hair had thinned, his voice grown gravelly, but I knew that face it belonged to the man who had once stood beside me in the mud of training fields, pushing through exhaustion, reminding me I wasn't alone. He gave me a half smile, though it faded quickly. "You ever wonder why your discharge came down so fast?" he asked without preamble. The words stopped me cold. My pulse beat faster, my scar prickling under my sleeve. I had always assumed it was bad luck, bad timing, an injury that left me on the wrong side of the review board. "They said I couldn't recover," I murmured. Miller shook his head slowly. "Nathan had friends on that board. He made sure they saw you as a liability. He didn't want competition, Evelyn. He didn't want your shadow dimming his medals." For a moment, the room tilted. My brother's smirk at the dinner table, father's approving nods, the laughter that always followed his stories, it all sharpened into something darker. Betrayal had been written into my life earlier than I knew. My fists clenched at my sides, nails biting into my palms. The door opened, and Director Whitaker strode in with his clipped, deliberate gait. His eyes swept across us before settling on me. "We're at 80%, he said, his voice as steady as granite. "Evidence is nearly complete: paper trails, contracts, audio. One more piece, and the case is airtight." I forced myself to breathe, to let the fury churn into resolve. I met Whitaker's gaze and then glanced at Miller, my voice low but certain. "I'll let him bury himself." Saying it aloud felt like anchoring a promise, one I would not break. Whitaker gave a curt nod, satisfaction flickering in his expression. He handed me a small envelope, its seal neat and heavy. "And it seems the opportunity has arrived." I slid it open with careful fingers. The embossed card gleamed, words engraved in bold, celebratory script. "Guest of honor, Major Nathan Carter." The paper trembled in my hand, though not from fear. My scar throbbed beneath my sleeve, not as a curse, but as a reminder. He thought he had ended me. He never understood I had only changed the battlefield. The room smelled of medals and arrogance. The Pentagon's ceremonial hall gleamed like a shrine to power. Marble floors reflected the light from towering chandeliers, each facet catching on brass and gold. Every uniform carried rows of polished medals, every laugh carried the certainty of belonging. I smoothed my dress with slow, steady fingers, willing myself to breathe as the air grew heavy with pomp and self-congratulation. I had been here before, once as a cadet trailing behind men who believed I was destined for greatness, before the fall, before the discharge papers. Tonight I stood not as one of them, but as something they could never name. From the front row, Nathan basked beneath the glow of admiration, his shoulders square, his grin dazzling, as though he were born to rule these halls. He carried himself like a king disguised in uniform, and the crowd applauded as if he were exactly that. His words slid across the room with rehearsed smoothness. "The Carter legacy," he began, voice rich and certain, "has always been one of service, sacrifice, and leadership. My grandfather stormed the beaches. My father upheld the honor of command. And now, as I continue this tradition," he paused for dramatic effect, letting the praise echo before continuing, "we prove that the Carters will always lead." I felt father's breath hot against my ear as he leaned closer, his words meant to strike without witnesses. "You don't belong here, Evelyn." The familiar sting settled deep in my chest, but I didn't flinch. I kept my eyes fixed on Nathan as though father's venom didn't exist, though my nails pressed hard into my palms. Across the aisle, Daniel shifted in his seat. I could feel his gaze searching me, uneasy. He knew me well enough to sense I was hiding something. I kept my face neutral, but the weight of the recorder hidden in my clutch, the files locked away in bureau systems, reminded me I wasn't powerless, not anymore. The evening unspooled in a blur of applause, toasts, and speeches from generals whose voices carried authority forged in decades of command. Nathan, ever the performer, slipped from anecdote to boast with the ease of a man certain of his untouchability. He told stories of victories, of contracts won, of battles overseen from the comfort of his rising rank. Each sentence dripped with arrogance, each pause filled by laughter and approving nods. When his gaze swept across the hall, it landed on me like a spotlight. He let the silence hang a moment too long before his smirk deepened. "And let us not forget," Nathan declared, his voice pitched for the entire hall to savor, "that not every Carter wore their service with honor. Some of us, well," he gestured toward me with a mock toast, eyes gleaming. "Even here, the failed officer hides in the shadows." The laughter rippled sharp and cold, puncturing the hall like bayonets. My father chuckled under his breath, proud. My mother sipped her wine without a flicker of protest. Daniel's hand twitched toward mine, then stopped, confusion clouding his face. I sat perfectly still, the scar beneath my sleeve burning, not with shame, but with memory, with the truth I carried alone. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed my chair back. The scrape of wood against marble sliced through the laughter like a blade. The hall quieted, dozens of eyes turning in unison. My breath came steady, the weight of every gaze pressing down. Nathan's smirk faltered, just slightly, as I rose to my feet. All eyes turned. General shook his hand. I clenched mine into a fist. The marble corridors of the Pentagon still hummed with echoes of applause as the crowd dispersed, uniforms shimmering under fluorescent light. Nathan stood in the center of it all, every handshake from a general fueling his smug grin. They called him Major Carter with weighty respect, as if his name carried more than blood and ambition. I kept to the edges, jaw tight, pulse steady, hands hidden against the folds of my coat so no one could see them trembling. Not from fear, never fear, but from the effort it took not to strike back too soon. The warmth of Daniel's hand brushed mine as he leaned closer, voice low. "You're shaking. What did he mean in there?" His brow furrowed, searching for truth I wasn't ready to give. I shook my head gently, eyes forward. "It was nothing," I whispered, though every syllable tasted like ash. Nathan's shadow fell across me before I saw him, his cologne cutting through the sterile air. He had left the generals behind, but the arrogance followed. His smile was private now, sharpened to wound. "You can't stand that I made it, can you?" His tone dripped poison. "Every salute I get is a reminder you'll never have one again." I kept my face neutral, my silence deliberate, though inside I replayed his words from the hall. Failed officer. He wanted me rattled, cornered in front of my husband, stripped of defense. Daniel's confusion deepened as his eyes darted between us. "Nathan, what are you talking about?" "Ask her," Nathan sneered, his voice dropping. "Ask your wife what it feels like to be the Carter family shame." His smirk widened, daring me to respond. I offered him nothing, no crack, no flinch, only a measured breath, as if his words carried no weight. Silence was my weapon tonight. As he stepped back, two senior officers brushed past, muttering congratulations to him. Nathan basked in it, then lowered his voice for their ears alone. "Tomorrow we finalize the numbers. The ledgers will prove everything clean." The phrase "the ledgers" hung in the air, a breadcrumb too rich to ignore. He didn't see me pause, didn't notice how the words burned into memory. By the time Daniel excused himself to fetch the car, I had already slipped my phone from my coat, thumb flying across the secure bureau system. The bait had to be subtle, believable enough to tempt him. A fabricated notation about a review of Carter defense accounts flagged for irregular structuring slipped into the database, time-stamped and encrypted. I imagined Nathan's eyes narrowing when it reached him, imagined his arrogance convincing him it was real. Minutes stretched long in that empty hallway, the echoes of power fading into silence. My reflection in the glass doors looked steady, but beneath it all a storm brewed. For years he'd written my scar as failure. Now I was rewriting the story. The buzz came sharp against my palm, a vibration that made my breath catch. A single line blinked across the screen. "Target will move tonight. Stay close." My fist tightened, not in anger this time, but in readiness. The first piece had shifted on the board. Every secret I kept from Daniel was a fracture in our marriage. The apartment was quiet, except for the faint hum of the radiator, its dry breath filling the winter air. Outside, Washington slept beneath December's frost, the city lights bleeding into the sky like faint embers. Inside, the silence was heavier than stone. Daniel stood in the doorway of our bedroom, arms crossed, eyes shadowed by something colder than anger, betrayal, waiting for an answer. "We made vows, Evelyn," he said finally, his voice tight, each word clipped like a blade. "Do you even remember them? No secrets, no walls. That was your promise." The words lanced through me, because I remembered too well. The candlelit chapel, his hand warm in mine, the trembling certainty that I had finally found someone who saw me as more than a broken soldier. No secrets. It had been easy to promise then, when the future was only hope. But tonight the oath tasted like glass in my throat. He took a step closer. "Tell me, Ev, what was all that with Nathan tonight? Why does he keep circling you like there's a story I don't know?" His voice cracked slightly, not with fury but with something worse. Fear. "Who are you right now?" I opened my mouth, felt the words crawl up my chest, only to die against the roof of my mouth. To speak would unravel months of work. compromise lives, dismantle the operation before it could bring my brother down. Silence wasn't cowardice, it was armor. Yet every second I stayed quiet, felt like a blade twisting deeper into him. Daniel's jaw clenched. He let out a hollow laugh, devoid of humor. That's it? Nothing? You're just going to stand there and let me wonder if I've been living with a stranger? His shoulders sagged as if exhaustion had replaced anger. He turned from me, dragging a pillow from the bed with one sharp tug. Where are you going? My voice was hoarse, softer than I intended. The couch, he muttered, walking past me without looking back. At least the couch doesn't lie by omission. The room shrank as he disappeared down the hall, leaving only the sound of his footsteps fading into the living room. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the badge on the nightstand, its golden surface catching the dim light. The emblem was supposed to be a shield, a reminder of honor and justice. Tonight, it felt like a wedge driven between us. I lifted it, the cold metal biting my palm, and whispered to the dark. I can't lose him, but I can't lose this case either. The words were confession and curse in one. The phone buzzed, sudden and sharp, shattering the stillness. I fumbled it open, heartbeat thundering. A coded message glowed across the encrypted screen, terse and unyielding. Ledger contact secured tomorrow. The fracture widened. One more secret, one more night where silence cost more than I could measure. And still, I knew I would keep it. Numbers don't bleed, but they can bury legacies. The bar near Arlington was nearly empty, its neon sign sputtering in the January frost like a heartbeat about to give out. Smoke curled lazily from the lone bartender's cigarette, and the low hum of an old jukebox draped the room in melancholy jazz. I chose a booth tucked in the far corner, back against the wall, where the shadows cloaked more than they revealed. To anyone watching, I was another woman escaping the winter with a drink. But my pulse betrayed me, hammering with every tick of the clock mounted above the bar. Captain Miller arrived exactly on time. His coat collar was turned up against the cold, and his eyes scanned the room with the wariness of a man who had seen too much battlefield deception. Sliding into the booth across from me, he set a plain manila folder on the table, as though it weighed 100 pounds. He didn't speak at first, just let his hand linger on it like a warning. "This is it," he said finally, his voice roughened by years and secrets. "The kind of paper that topples families? You sure you're ready to carry it?" My fingers brushed the folder, the cardboard cool under my touch. I opened it slowly, page by page. Rows of numbers filled the sheet's contracts, purchase orders, offshore transfers. To anyone else, they might look like accounting trivia, but my eyes locked onto one pattern, then another, and the pit in my stomach deepened. Structuring deliveries. The same phrase Nathan had thrown out so carelessly in the banquet hall. Here, in black and white, was proof that his arrogance had roots in crime. And then my breath froze. Richard Carter's name, my father's, etched at the bottom of page after page. His signature, bold and proud, sprawled across the ledgers like a stain that wouldn't wash out. Not just Nathan. Not just greed. This was the Carter legacy, inked in betrayal. Every signature told me I had never been an outsider. I had been exiled because I had refused to play their game. An undercover agent slid into the booth beside Miller, his cap pulled low, his jacket ordinary enough to blend into the crowd. He didn't speak, but placed a slim flash drive beside my glass of water. "Backups," Miller muttered. "If one burns, the other survives." I tucked the drive into my coat, pulse quickening. For the first time, the evidence wasn't theory or suspicion. It was solid, undeniable, and it terrified me. The sense of being watched crept in slowly, first the prickling at the back of my neck, then the reflection in the bar's cracked mirror. A figure lingered too long near the entrance, pretending to study the jukebox. His shoulders squared, his eyes catching every movement I made. I forced my voice steady as I whispered, "We're not alone." Miller's gaze flicked up, subtle and sharp, then "Keep moving like we are." I gathered the papers back into the folder, slid it into my bag, and rose with deliberate calm. But the shadow followed. Out in the bitter January night, his footsteps echoed mine, never too close, never too far. Each crunch of gravel beneath his boots sent a shiver down my spine. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I hesitated, then checked it, my heart slamming against my ribs. A message glared across the screen, simple and merciless. "Stop digging, or Daniel pays." For a moment, the world tilted. The cold air bit deeper, the city lights blurred. My husband's face, his confusion, His hurt flashed before me. They knew. They had reached into the one place I couldn't guard with a badge or a gun. I steadied my breath, fingers shaking as I slid the phone away. Fear couldn't win. Not now. My hand tightened around the encrypted drive in my pocket, its edges digging into my palm. These numbers weren't just figures. They were weapons, and tonight they became mine. Back inside the safety of my car, doors locked, I slipped the drive into a hidden compartment beneath the console. As the city roared faintly in the distance, I whispered to myself, "Now the game turns lethal." My mother begged me with tears, "Don't break the family." The Carter mansion's living room smelled of cedar polish and old firewood, the kind of ancestral pride that clung to heavy curtains and leather chairs. I stood by the mantel where portraits of decorated Carters stared down from gilded frames, every one of them in uniform, every one of them draped in honor. Except me. Always except me. Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for mine. Her eyes were red, swollen from nights of worry, or perhaps from the performance of worry. I could no longer tell. "Evelyn," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her plea. "Families survive by silence. That's how we endure storms. We do not air what should remain inside these walls." Her grip tightened, desperate, her tears rolling down her cheeks as if they could cleanse the ledger stains I had already seen. Richard sat in his armchair, a glass of scotch swirling in his hand like it was the only truth he still trusted. His eyes fixed on me, sharp and unforgiving. "If you betrayed us, you are no Carter. You never were." The words landed like a verdict, pronounced without trial, and then Nathan, lounging on the sofa as if it were his throne, let out a laugh that grated like steel against stone. "She wouldn't dare," he scoffed, his metals gleaming in the firelight. "She doesn't have it in her. She'll run back to her shadows and lick her wounds, like always." His arrogance filled the room, crowding out even the silence. The weight of their voices pressed against me from every side, pleading, condemning, mocking. My heart beat hard in my chest, not from fear, but from the steady recognition that this was no family anymore. This was a syndicate of blood and betrayal. I let the pause stretch, long enough for Margaret's sobs to echo, long enough for Richard's glare to burn, long enough for Nathan's laughter to ring hollow. When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet but unyielding. "Try me." The words cut through the air, soft as silk but sharp enough to slice. Nathan's smile faltered for the briefest instant, a crack in his armor. Margaret recoiled as though I had slapped her. Richard's Scotch glass froze mid-air, then lowered slowly, his jaw tightening. I moved toward the door, not waiting for the response I knew would come. My steps echoed down the marble hallway, each one a rejection of their doctrine of silence. Yet before I reached the threshold, I caught the faint murmur of Richard's voice behind me. His tone was low, coiled with menace, but I heard every syllable. "Keep her watched. She's a threat." The fire crackled. Margaret wept softly. Nathan chuckled under his breath, but Richard's command lingered in the air like smoke, sealing the truth I had always known. I wasn't part of their family. I was their enemy, and they had just made me dangerous enough to prove it. Every step toward justice feels like a step away from love. The corridors of FBI headquarters hummed with a kind of midnight electricity, that subtle tension when desks were empty, but the walls themselves seemed awake, listening. My heels echoed against the polished floor as I carried the folder under my arm, the Carter ledgers, the bait I had slipped into place, the final pieces of a puzzle that had consumed every breath since fall. Inside the operations room, the lights were dimmed, except for the glow of screens casting pale light across the table. Director Whitaker stood waiting, his face set in stone. Captain Miller leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his jaw tight. Neither man needed reminding of what this evidence meant. I slid the folder across the table, opened it, and watched the numbers spill into the room like poison gas. Wire transfers, fraudulent invoices, offshore accounts. Each page breathed corruption, each signature another nail in the Carter coffin. My own father's handwriting stared up at me with the arrogance of a man who never thought his daughter would one day hold it against him. "This isn't suspicion anymore," I said, my voice low but steady. "It's the whole scheme. Procurement fraud on a scale that siphoned millions. Structuring, laundering, payoffs, all signed under the Carter name." Miller let out a whistle, grim. "Your brother didn't just play soldier. He built an empire of rot." Whitaker studied the papers for a long moment. His hand hovered over the authorization form, pen poised, the weight of decision pressing down like an iron curtain. Then, with a deliberate stroke, he signed. His voice carried the authority of finality. Operation Iron Honor is live. The word settled into my chest like a brand. No turning back. The machine of justice had been set into motion, and I was the spark that lit its fuse. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with the realization of what tomorrow would bring: the storm, the confrontation, the stripping away of masks in front of men who had mocked me for years. Miller placed a hand briefly on my shoulder, rough but reassuring. "You're walking into fire, don't flinch." "I won't," I whispered, though the echo in my mind carried doubt. I thought of Daniel, his eyes on me when I had chosen silence over truth, his words lingering like ash. "I don't know who you are anymore." The gap between us had widened with every secret, every mission I couldn't share. And now, with the storm on the horizon, I felt that gap turning into a canyon. I looked back down at the evidence one last time. The Carter legacy laid bare, every line of ink, a betrayal. My lips moved almost of their own accord, the vow I had carried in silence finding its way into sound. Tomorrow, he mocks me for the last time. The room was silent except for the steady hum of machines. Whitaker gathered the folder. Miller straightened, and I turned toward the glass wall of the operations room. That's when I froze. Beyond the glass, in the dimly lit hallway, stood Daniel. His hands were in his pockets, his face half-shadowed, but his eyes burned into me with suspicion, hurt, and something dangerously close to accusation. He didn't move, didn't knock, didn't speak, just stood there, watching, silently demanding an answer I still couldn't give. And in that silence, I realized the cost of every step I had taken. Justice was close. But love was slipping further away with every breath. Tomorrow, Nathan would stand before generals, and I would stand before him. The apartment was still, but not silent. The city breathed faintly through the windows, distant sirens, the hum of late-night traffic, a world turning as though tomorrow weren't a storm poised to split my life in two. Papers spread across the dining table, neatly aligned in rows, told a story that only I seemed willing to read. Warrant authorizations, sworn affidavits, evidence logs, the Carter name inked across each page like blood on parchment. My badge lay in the center, glinting under the lamp's muted light, more crown than curse, more truth than any medal Nathan ever pinned to his chest. Daniel leaned against the doorway, arms folded, his eyes heavy with exhaustion and something worse, distance. His voice broke the hush. "You've been living in two worlds, Evelyn, and I'm not sure which one I married." I didn't look up immediately. My pen traced the outline of the warrant, though I had read it so many times the words were burned into memory. Finally, I met his gaze. His face carried the weight of the vows we'd once exchanged, the nights we'd whispered of futures that now seemed like another lifetime. "I deserve the truth," he said quietly. "Not tomorrow. Not hidden in paperwork. From you. Now." The ache in my chest pulsed against my ribs. I wanted to tell him everything, to explain how betrayal ran not only through family veins but through the silence that had spread between us. But if I told him, I risked his safety, risked the entire operation, and so my words came out colder than my heart intended. "Tomorrow, everyone will know." Daniel's jaw tightened. He turned away, running a hand through his hair, as if searching for air that wasn't there. "You're not just fighting your brother," he muttered. "You're fighting me too, and I don't know how much longer I can hold my ground." The door to our bedroom clicked softly as he retreated, leaving me with the shadows and the evidence that had defined my nights. For a long time I sat there, staring at the papers, at the badge that had become both anchor and weapon. Then slowly, almost reverently, I rose and walked to the closet. From the back, wrapped in tissue and years of silence, I pulled the jacket I hadn't worn since the day they dismissed me, my uniform. The fabric smelled faintly of old starch and memory. The sleeves were stiff, the brass buttons dulled, but it carried the dignity they had tried to strip away. Sliding my arms into it felt like reclaiming air after drowning. I caught my reflection in the mirror, scars, lines, grief carved into my face, but strength too, forged in silence. I stood straighter, shoulders squaring beneath the weight of fabric and history. My lips moved in a whisper. Not for Daniel, not for Whitaker, not even for Nathan. For me. No more shadows. The words carried like a vow, a binding tether, pulling me from the edge of doubt. The apartment seemed to still further, as if the walls themselves knew the world would tilt tomorrow. Then my phone buzzed sharply against the table. The screen lit up with a single message from Whitaker: all units in position. D-Day. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tremor run through my hands before steadying them on the badge. Tomorrow wasn't just another step, it was the reckoning. The hall glittered with medals, but arrogance gleamed brighter on Nathan's face. The ceremonial hall was a cathedral of brass and pride. Chandeliers spilled light across uniforms pressed to perfection, rows of polished metals flashing like miniature suns. Generals and dignitaries filled the air with the smell of cologne, starched fabric, and anticipation. Behind the podium, Nathan stood tall, his smile sharpened into something closer to a blade than warmth. He knew the spotlight belonged to him. He reveled in it. His voice carried with the assurance of a man who believed the world bent to his will. Tonight, he declared, we celebrate not only my promotion, but the enduring honor of the Carter legacy. A family of service, a family of sacrifice, a family that leads where others follow. His words dripped with self-worship, dressed in patriotic cadence that made the room nod along. Richard Carter, seated at the front with Margaret beside him, wore pride like armor, chin raised, eyes glinting as though Nathan were the embodiment of everything he'd ever demanded. Margaret dabbed discreetly at the corner of her eye with a silk handkerchief, her quiet tears glowing in the soft light tears of pride, not grief. Evelyn sat several rows back, the uniform jacket heavy on her shoulders, though it wasn't adorned with medals. It carried something else: memory, loss, and defiance stitched into the seams. Daniel shifted beside her, uneasy, his hand twitching as if he wanted to reach for hers, but couldn't quite bridge the gulf of secrecy still hanging between them. Nathan's speech rolled forward, crescendoing with arrogance. We are Carters, leaders by birth, leaders by choice. Some of us carry scars that prove victory. Others— He paused, scanning the room until his gaze landed squarely on Evelyn. The silence stretched like a drawn bow. Others collect scars that prove only failure. The hall rippled, laughter nervous, eager, cruel scattered among the rows. Uneasy whispers followed, sliding like snakes between polished shoes and gleaming chairs. A few officers exchanged glances, discomfort flickering in their eyes but unspoken. Richard's lips curled in quiet satisfaction. Evelyn felt the air compress around her chest. The words stung less for their cruelty than for the familiarity. This was the same venom Nathan had poured over her for years, sharpened now with the stage of authority. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She could hear Daniel mutter under his breath, a hiss of protest, but his voice drowned under the hall's laughter. For a moment she sat frozen, jaw-locked, nails biting into her palms. She remembered the day they handed her discharge papers, the smirk Nathan tried to hide, the silence her parents wrapped around her like a coffin. They had buried her alive that day. Tonight, he tried to bury her again before generals, before the nation. But the weight of the badge in her pocket was heavier than shame. Slowly, deliberately, Evelyn pushed back her chair. The scrape echoed, slicing through laughter like a blade. Heads turned. Whispers cut short. Nathan's smirk faltered, only slightly, but enough for her to see the tremor beneath his mask. She rose, the uniform jacket catching the chandelier's light, every seam alive again after years of silence. Her voice carried, steady and sharp, slicing the air with the authority of truth. You're right. Scars don't grant authority. She reached into her pocket, her hand sure, her chest unyielding. The badge caught the light, a brilliant glint that flared across the hall like a star tearing through darkness. She lifted it high, her words unflinching. But this does, gasps erupted, a collective intake of breath that shook the room. Generals leaned forward, eyes widening, whispers cascading in disbelief. Richard's expression hardened into stone. Margaret's hand froze mid-dab, the handkerchief trembling. Daniel's eyes burned with a mix of awe and fear. Nathan's face, so carefully constructed in arrogance, cracked, the gleam fading into something raw, something closer to panic. The hall no longer glittered with medals. It glittered with the truth, and it burned brighter than his crown of arrogance. Silence is heavier than applause, and it crushed Nathan first. The echo of gasps still hung in the ceremonial hall, but now it was silence that reigned, a silence so heavy it seemed to pin Nathan to the stage. For the first time that evening, his arrogance faltered, his smile twitching, as though it couldn't decide whether to remain smug or collapse entirely. Rows of uniforms stiffened, medals that once glittered with pride, now dulled by the weight of scandal. Evelyn stepped forward, the badge still gleaming in her raised hand. Her voice cut clean through the suffocating hush, amplified not by microphone but by conviction. "By federal warrant," she said, her tone steady, almost surgical. "Nathan Carter and Richard Carter are under arrest for conspiracy, procurement fraud, and treasonous abuse of position." A ripple tore through the room. Generals shifted uneasily in their seats. The crowd, dignitaries, families, officers did not applaud, did not murmur approval. They simply froze, as if the very air had been stolen. Nathan's laugh broke the stillness, sharp and jarring. "You think this is justice?" His voice cracked with forced bravado. "This is a performance. A bluff dressed in brass buttons. Who do you think they'll believe? A failed officer in a borrowed uniform or the man they just promoted?" Richard stood slowly, eyes narrowed like a hawk circling prey. He looked more offended than frightened, his voice low, poisonous. "You dare disgrace the Carter name in front of these men? Evelyn, you've always been weak. This little stunt proves nothing." The sound of boots on polished floor cut through his sneer. Security staff, already alerted by Whitaker's command, moved in crisp formation toward the stage. Evelyn did not waver. General Anderson, seated in the front row, lowered his gaze. His hand rose to his chest, fingers brushing across a medal pinned there, a symbol of valor, once unquestioned. He unfastened it with quiet deliberation and placed it on the arm of his chair, the metal clinking softly against the wood. Then he looked away, the shame of association radiating in his silence. The gesture spoke louder than applause ever could. Nathan's laughter sputtered into protest. "You can't this hall! These men, they're mine!" His words collapsed under their own weight as security encircled him. Evelyn's voice, cold and merciless, cut across his flailing arrogance. "Security," she commanded, her tone edged with steel. "Show him what authority means." Two guards seized his arms, twisting them behind his back. The metallic snap of cuffs echoed across the hall like a gavel strike. Nathan struggled, but the fight in him was theater only, defiance without substance. His face flushed crimson, the smirk gone, replaced with the frantic look of a man who finally realized the stage was no longer his. Richard's roar shattered the moment. "You betrayed your own blood!" His voice carried over the crowd, thick with rage, shaking as agents advanced on him. Spittle glistened at the corners of his mouth, his fists trembling, the patriarch's composure disintegrating in the glare of lights and witnesses. The room stood frozen, the elite of the military watching as the Carter name once spoken with reverence crumbled under the weight of truth. Nathan in cuffs, Richard bellowing, cornered, Evelyn standing tall, her badge the only crown that mattered. And in that silence, heavier than applause, heavier than shame, the downfall of the Carters had truly begun. My father didn't fall to bullets. He fell to the truth. The hall smelled of cold marble and sweat now, not honor. The echo of the cuff still hung in the air as Richard Carter's face drained of its usual bronze pride. His chest rose and fell heavily, the weight of years of command giving way to something he had always thought himself immune to exposure. His hands, steady once in war councils and boardrooms, trembled as agents spread the ledgers across the podium. Numbers, signatures, transactions his empire reduced to black ink on white paper. Margaret broke first. Her knees buckled against the edge of her chair as tears streaked her makeup. "You've torn this family apart," she sobbed, her voice carrying across the rows of stiff uniforms. She wasn't looking at Richard, not even at Nathan. Her grief latched onto me, her daughter who had chosen truth over silence. The sound of her voice cut deeper than Nathan's jeers ever had. Richard's eyes darted, desperate, calculating for an escape route that didn't exist. The swagger of the patriarch was gone. In its place was a hollowed man staring at his legacy crumbling under the scrutiny of his peers. His lips moved, forming words too low to hear, but the fury in his stare said enough. Daniel appeared beside me, his presence both anchor and storm. His voice was low, meant only for me, but it pierced sharper than any public condemnation. "You're not who I married." His gaze wasn't furious, it was worse. It was tired, disillusioned, as if he'd just realized the woman beside him belonged to a world that would never let him in. I couldn't look away from him, though my badge still burned against my palm. My reply came softer than I intended, the confession not of guilt, but of necessity. "No," I whispered. "I'm who I had to become." Security tightened their hold on Richard as his body finally buckled. He slumped, knees striking the marble with a dull thud that echoed through the silent hall. For a moment, I saw not the general, not the businessman, not the patriarch, only an aging man collapsing under the undeniable weight of truth. Margaret wailed, reaching for him, but an agent pulled her back gently. The spectators watched, frozen, their silence more damning than any jury's verdict. Generals who had once toasted Richard now averted their eyes. His allies had become his witnesses. His empire had become evidence. Dragged to his feet, Richard's strength returned not as dignity, but as venom. His eyes locked on mine, burning, unbroken, even in defeat. His voice thundered across the hall, ragged and raw. Blood is forever. You'll regret this. The words clung to me as he was pulled away, his roar echoing into the distance until the heavy doors closed behind him. Margaret sobbed into her hands, Daniel stood apart, and the air of victory felt like ash in my throat. Because in winning, I had lost what little family I had left. Justice doesn't roar. It whispers in the silence after everything burns. The night air outside the Pentagon was sharp, chilled by flashing police lights and the murmurs of dignitaries dispersing into darkness. The once proud Carter name had just been dragged through marble halls and locked into armored vans, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with the aftershock. Nathan's glare burned through the narrow slit of the custody van's window, venom pouring from his silence like smoke from dying embers. He pressed his hands against the glass as though he could still claw his way free, but the steel bars mocked him. Richard sat opposite, his once commanding frame hunched, eyes dim, lips sealed in the posture of a man already buried beneath disgrace. Margaret stood in the cold, her shawl clutched so tightly that her knuckles whitened. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at them. She stared into the distance as though waiting for dawn that would never come. For the first time, I didn't see her as a mother, nor as the dutiful wife of a general. I saw her as a woman hollowed out by her own silence. She turned away before the van pulled off, her figure swallowed by the night, leaving me with an ache sharper than any battlefield wound. Whitaker's voice broke the stillness, steady and solemn. Justice was worth the cost, he said, his hand briefly resting on my shoulder. The weight of his words pressed down, not like comfort, but like the truth unyielding, inevitable, final. I nodded, but the fire inside me was no longer triumph. It was ash. Daniel stepped closer, his face caught between the harsh glow of red and blue lights. He didn't need to raise his voice. The exhaustion in his tone cut deep enough. I need time, Evelyn. I don't know us anymore. His eyes lingered on me, searching for the woman he had once promised forever to, but found only the shadow of a soldier-turned-agent, scarred by both war and betrayal. Before I could form an answer, he stepped back, swallowed by the dispersing crowd, leaving a hollow that no medal or badge could fill. Months slipped past in blurred fragments, court dates, sealed evidence, testimonies delivered with surgical precision. Nathan's fury filled headlines until his name became shorthand for arrogance undone. Richard's silence echoed louder still, the kind of silence that crushed legacies. By the time their sentences were read, the Carter estate had become nothing more than a footnote in procurement scandals. But their shadows lingered in my chest, like shrapnel. One afternoon in late summer 2024, I sat in my office at the bureau as sunlight painted thin lines across the desk. An envelope lay before me, the handwriting unmistakable, Richard's hand, aged but unbroken. The letter inside was brief, every word drenched in scorn and plea alike. Was it worth destroying your family? I read it once, twice, then fed it into the shredder. The machine devoured his words until only confetti remained, fluttering into the waste bin like dying leaves. My whisper was barely audible over the hum. Family built on lies isn't family. Justice is. The hum faded, and I turned to the window. Beyond the glass, a group of fresh recruits gathered in the courtyard, their uniforms crisp, their faces lit with the unscarred belief that service was still pure. They waited, their eyes drifting upward toward the figure they had been told would guide them. I straightened, badge catching the sunlight in a glint that was neither crown nor curse, but something harder, cleaner. My story had ended in ashes, but theirs was just beginning. And as I stepped out to meet them, I knew mine had only just begun too. The Carter legacy crumbled under its own lies, leaving behind not the roar of triumph but the heavy silence of truth unveiled. Justice had not come swiftly, but when it arrived, it stripped away arrogance, deceit, and blood ties that once seemed unbreakable. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime, reminding us that silence only feeds betrayal. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. Like, share, subscribe, and leave your thoughts below. Comment 1 if you felt the story's justice resonate with you, or 2 if you believe it left something unresolved.